right, good afternoon, everybody. Technical problems aside. Okay, thank you so much for joining us. We sincerely appreciate your time this afternoon. My name is Steve Rogers. I'm the Chief Executive of Right People, Right Job, and we are a registered WWASA service provider and ambassador. A quick note on engagement. Please use the chat. It's very important to have a conversation this afternoon, as against simply a presentation. We would appreciate your thoughts, your questions, your ideas, and that gets an important conversation happening on the topic of wellness. As a result of this session, we will get into a conversation at the end. Any questions that you've added during the session, we will talk about right at the end. Okay, so before we speak about workplace wellness, the research or the collaboration, we first of all need to confront the scale of the crisis emerging around us. Across the world, institutions are becoming more technologically advanced, more connected, and more efficient than at any other point in time in human history. Yet, paradoxically, the humans inside our systems are becoming increasingly exhausted. South Africa alone loses between 161 and 235 billion rand every year due to mental health-related productivity losses. Globally, depression and anxiety result in the loss of approximately 12 billion working days annually. Gallup estimates that disengagement now costs the global economy nearly $10 trillion every year. And perhaps the most alarming statistic of all, only 20% of employees globally are truly engaged at work. Think about what that means. The overwhelming majority of people inside modern institutions are not thriving. Many or most are simply enduring, existing at work. The WHO now formally recognizes burnout as an occupational phenomenon caused by chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. That is a profound shift. Because burnout is increasingly being recognized not merely as an individual weakness, but as evidence of systems operating beyond sustainable human limits. We have become exceptionally good at building high-performance institutions, but increasingly uncertain about how to sustain the humans that need to maintain that performance. And perhaps that is the defining challenge of our time. Not simply technological advancement, but whether human beings can sustainably survive inside the systems we are creating. At this point, I'd like to hand over to Ellen Fritz, who is the chairperson of the WWASA board. I know we had a few technical questions of Ellen getting on board as a presenter just now. So Ellen, if you will just open your camera so I can see you. Ellen is a seasoned executive with extensive experience in leadership, organizational development, governance, and strategic transformation across both the public and private sectors. He is deeply passionate about building resilient organizations capable of sustaining both performance and people in increasingly complex environments. Now, I can see Farnes's face, so Ellen won't help us to explore this. I think Farnes is going to help us to explore this, and he'll take us through the leadership, governance, and institutional sustainability imperative. Farnes, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Steve, and apologies to both Alan and our attendees for technical problems, which is beyond our control. So let me then proceed on behalf of Alan and explain to you why this conversation matters. Historically, organizational governance focused primarily on financial performance, operational efficiency, compliance, and risk management. But increasingly, a new category of institutional risk is emerging: human sustainability risk. Across sectors, organizations are experiencing rising levels of leadership fatigue, disengagement, burnout, psychological strain, and workforce instability. There are no longer isolated employee well-being concerns. They are becoming strategic governance issues, because ultimately the sustainability of institutions increasingly depends on the sustainability of the humans inside them. Organizational resilience is not determined only by infrastructure, systems, or financial resources. It is also determined by trust, psychological safety, leadership capability, adaptability, and the long-term well-being of the workforce itself. And this is why conversations around ESG, institutional resilience, and sustainability are increasingly beginning to include human well-being as a core strategic consideration. Because institutions cannot remain sustainable if the humans required to sustain them are exhausted. And perhaps this is where universities have an especially important role to play. Universities help shape the future workforce, future leadership, and increasingly the future design of institutions themselves. If this is truly one of the defining human challenges of our time, then the question becomes, who helps society navigate it? Historically, universities have played a critical role during periods of major societal transformation. Universities helped society navigate industrialization, scientific advancement, technological disruption, and democratic transformation. And perhaps now society needs universities again, not only to produce graduates, but to help us better understand how human beings can sustainably function inside increasingly complex systems. Because the challenges we are discussing today are not isolated to one discipline. They sit at the intersection of psychology, behavioral science, leadership, governance, public health, organizational research, technology, and social systems. Universities remain among the few institutions capable of bringing these disciplines together in meaningful ways. And perhaps this is exactly where the real opportunity lies. Not simply improving workplace wellness, but helping design institutions that are psychologically sustainable for the future. Because ultimately, the future competitiveness of organizations may increasingly depend on their ability to sustain human well-being, adaptability, trust, and resilience over time. And universities have an extraordinary opportunity to help shape that future. Thank you, and back to Steve.
Thanks, Farnes. I think you're far better looking than Alan anyway, so it was a good move. Our next speaker is Dr. Gustav Wolfart, one of South Africa's, oops, I've just had control taken away from me. Okay, Gustav, if you can give me 2 seconds before you take control. Our next speaker is Dr. Gustav Wolfart, one of South Africa's leading voices in health systems, strengthening professional development and mental health innovation. As founder of the Foundation for Professional Development, his work has helped expand healthcare education, system development, and mental health access across Africa and beyond. Today, Dr. Wolfart will help us explore the growing psychological pressures facing young people, students, and the future workforce. Dr. Wolfart, over to you.
Thank you very much, Steve. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here. So you mentioned some really scary numbers and the impact it's got on the economy. This was, Fawn has mentioned it on behalf of Alan. But I think the most important thing really out of this is that what we're looking at here is really a severe workforce challenge. And I think which is already a human sustainability crisis. So one of the most concerning realities emerging from current research is that many of young people arriving at universities are already carrying a significant psychological strain even before their professional lives have started. And we know that as much fun as university can be, it's also a very stressful period of time. And what we've seen in work that we've done looking at adolescents and young people is really something everybody should be worried about. So just common mental health conditions like depression and anxiety is sitting above 40%. Post-traumatic stress is sitting around 20 to 25%. Those are figures that are typically associated with soldiers coming back from combat. But the reality is that a lot of young people in South Africa grow up in such dire straits that their trauma exposure is sufficient for them to have post-traumatic stress. And if we look at parallel to that, suicide ideation, again, incredibly high, and then seeking temporary oblivion in high-risk activities like substance use and binge drinking, etc., sits around 80%. And I think all of this, if you start thinking about this, has profound implications, not just from a healthcare perspective, but obviously from education, employability, workforce readiness, and long-term just societal resistance perspective. Because we can't look at through a public health lens at these young people and separate them from the future workforce. This is our future workforce. We are going to be one of the countries with one of the largest population. And these are the people who've got to become our future professionals, our researchers, our academics. We're hoping that they'll be entrepreneurs, but they're going to end up in leadership positions. And they will shape the next generation of organizations. So think about this. These are people who are coming with really serious, high levels of anxiety, uncertainty, emotional fatigue, trauma exposure, and are put in a high psychological pressure environment. So from that perspective, the way I see it is that there's a really big obligation on universities to start looking at the well-being of their student population. Because a tertiary institution, and I'm here today wearing the hat of the private higher education institutions, they are not just centers of learnings. They're really organizations where you can shape resilience support systems, where you can develop coping capacity, and where we've got to create the future leaders that's going to build the society we're going to stay in. So from my perspective, and I think from anybody who really seriously looks at this, the long-term sustainability of the future workforce may increasingly depend on how seriously we respond to their reality now. So in other words, and the picture I painted for you is the reality of young South Africans. Now layer onto that up to 90% of South Africans who go looking for mental health care. In other words, they get past all the stigma, the fear, and they go and knock on the door of somebody to help them, will not be helped, right? It varies a bit between the public and the private sector, but the bottom line is there is no help out there. And human beings have evolved over a lot of time to adapt to certain levels of stress, to be able to recover from that, to form the social connections they need, extrapolate meaning out of what's happening to them, and use that to cope with the challenges that life or that life throws at you. But no one evolved for the speed that we are living under now, right? If you think back 30 years ago, the internet didn't even exist. But working in a modern environment is the opposite to what we developed for. Today, people have to operate in environments that are characterized by constant digital interaction. We're all dealing with information overload. We are expected to respond immediately. And again, I'm just thinking back in the good old days when we had functional postal services. People sent you a letter. They didn't expect to answer back the same day. Now people send you an email and then they send you a WhatsApp because you haven't answered to their email. And that keeps us in a hyper-vigilant situation the whole time. We also have to deal with continuous change and then relentless performance pressure on people to perform, I guess. But the reality of all of this is that institutional complexity is accelerating much faster than humans' ability to adapt to that. And if you throw into the mix AI into this, we've now entered a realm that we really cannot predict at what speed and how it's going to change. But the one thing I can tell you, it's creating huge anxiety amongst, for example, students about whether their jobs are going to exist by the time that they finish their studies. So what do we expect from leaders today? As we expect from them to be able to deal with ambiguity and uncertainty. We've got to expect them to navigate constant disruption. They've got to somehow manage all the emotional stress and strain. And we saw the statistics about what it costs the economy due to absenteeism and presenteeism. They've got to process enormous amounts of information. They've got huge pressure on them to maintain a high performance culture. And the same, all of that cascades down to employees, and especially cascades down to junior employees coming into the organization who are buckling under that pressure, right? They are suffering from cognitive overload, which means they make really bad decisions. They are emotionally burnt out and anxious. And quite frankly, you struggle to find somebody who's not psychologically exhausted. So we're not dealing just with stress. There's good stress and bad stress. We are dealing with systems that are exceeding the sustainable human psychological limits. And the reality is that under that, people will burn out. With the exception of there's like a minute percentage of 1 to 2% of people who you cannot burn out. They've got some genetic resilience. But the bottom line is they are going to burn out. And it bothers me that what I run in the most is that this is perceived as being an individual problem. And it's the opposite, right? So we mentioned earlier that WHO has placed burnout onto the International Classification of Diseases. And it's probably one of the few mental health conditions, if not the only one, where you can actually blame somebody. Because the rule of thumb has always been you can never, ever blame a person for their anxiety, depression, their substance abuse, because it's our brains and our biochemistries and our genetics predispose us for this. But burnout is the one thing where you can blame somebody, and you can blame the employer. So to bring it back to what does this mean? It means that we need radical redesign of systems. And the challenge facing modern institution is no longer only operational efficiency. It's really whether you can maintain the performance and optimize the performance of the humans that you're going to need despite AI without putting so much pressure on those humans that they buckle. Right, now I've been speaking a lot about anxiety and burnout and emotional fatigue and disengagement, but we're not speaking about isolated workplace problems anymore. I mean, the stats I showed you earlier shows that there's a whole generation entering adulthood under unprecedented psychological pressure. And I quoted you the South African research, and it is, if it doesn't scare you, it scares the hell out of me, right? And given the big gap in accessing treatment and mental health care, only a small fraction of our student population who are entering the university and who are coping with these mental health or have to live with these mental health issues are probably coping with them. So we've got to think about what is the obligation that comes with that to universities. These are young people entering our campuses, they're entering our workplaces, and they will eventually become future leaders of our institutions. Many, as I've mentioned already, are psychologically exhausted before their professional lives have even begun. And at the same time, the environments they are entering are becoming more demanding, more complex, and more psychologically overwhelming every day. So we are asking human beings to adapt continuously to a system that's evolving faster than human psychological capacity. And quite frankly, we cannot do it. So we've got to really think about how do we use opportunities like AI to embrace it. Lots of universities are absolutely opposed to AI within the educational environment, but it is a very valuable aid for students. We've got to figure out, and it's probably one of the most defining challenges of our time, is how do we provide the psychosocial and mental health support that students need as they come on our campuses. And it's not really a matter of whether human beings can cope within these systems. It's going to be because we know they're not coping. It's a matter about how can we redesign these systems to ensure that we produce people that come out on the other side that are capable of leading in a world that doesn't play by the rules anymore. And this is why this conversation really matters, because the future of organizational sustainability may probably ultimately depend on our ability to redesign institutions around sustainable human functioning and move away from this idea of operational functionality. So if we are serious about addressing these challenges, then we must move away beyond assumptions and anecdotes. Now, I gave you some hard facts about the state of the mental health of adolescents and young people, but there was a lot of assumptions that I drew in terms of what happens when they get to the universities. But I think we can't depend on assumptions. We need evidence. And one of the major weaknesses is that many organizational wellness initiatives are often not fully understood, don't fully understand the lived experience of the people inside them. They are produced by consultants. They measure productivity, performance, and operational outcomes, but they often fail to measure the human climate driving those outcomes. And it's in this context where I think climate studies become critically important. And this is one area where I really, really desperately want the higher education institutions to start collaborating and specifically leveraging WWASA as a platform for collaboration. WWASA is doing research on perceptions, views of the 8 dimensions of workplace wellness. And you can see there's a simple QR code you can scan, and there's a 5-minute little survey behind it. But we need this information. We need it to understand what's happening at universities. So from my side, I will definitely promote this amongst the private higher education institutions, because I really do believe universities can contribute meaningful through getting involved in these type of climate surveys, working with organizations like WWASA to understand those surveys, and then based on that, start designing the type of support programs that is needed to ensure not only academic success in the long term, but also balanced, successful human beings that will be able to lead our country into the future and into a future that is really, really unpredictable. So that's it from me, and thank you. Back to you, Steve.
Thanks very much, Dr. Wolfert. Appreciate that. Okay, our next speaker, and forgive me if I butchered this name from a technical point of view, but our next speaker is Dr. Wellbeing, a behavioral scientist, performance strategist, and author specializing in sustainable human performance and organizational well-being. His work focuses on how behavioral systems, leadership, and organizational culture influence resilience, engagement, and long-term performance. Dr. Hene helps organizations move beyond motivational approaches towards evidence-based systems that support sustainable human functioning and high-performance environments. Today, he will help us explore how behavioral science can contribute to healthier and more sustainable organizational cultures. Dr. Hene, over to you.
Thank you very much, Steve and Dr. Gustav. As I've indicated, Sorry, so let me just get this right. Sorry. Thank you, Steve. What's quite interesting is that one of the most important shifts taking place globally is the growing recognition that human well-being cannot be separated from the systems people operate inside. For many years, as you all might know, that organizations approach wellness primarily through isolated interventions, either from a wellness day perspective or creating awareness campaigns, having resilience workshops, or in some instances, having motivational programs. And while these initiatives, I found they may provide value, I've seen that they often fail to address the deeper organizational conditions shaping human behavior and performance every single day. Because people do not experience stress in isolation, they experience stress inside systems. Behavioral science increasingly shows us that sustainable performance is heavily influenced by a number of factors. One is the leadership. How does the leadership behave? What is the organizational culture? The existence of psychological safety, the workload structures, trust as a big thing, and community patterns, and the overall emotional climate of institutions. In other words, many organizations' challenges that appear individual on the surface, they're actually systematic underneath. As has been highlighted, burnout, disengagement, decision fatigue, emotional exhaustion, and declining resistance are often signals that organization systems themselves may be under strain. And when systems become chronically overloaded, even high-capable individuals eventually begin to struggle. That is why the future of organization well-being may depend less on isolated wellness programs and more on our ability to design psychologically sustainable human systems. Because ultimately, sustainable institutions require sustainable human function. One thing, if we want sustainable organizational well-being, then it's important that we need to move beyond looking wellness in isolation and begin to examine how institutions themselves are designed, which is the reason we are here. Organizations are not collections of disconnected programs. They are behavioral ecosystems. Why? Because leadership shapes culture. The culture shapes the behavior. Behavior shapes trust, engagement, adaptability, and long-term performance. Which then means that organizations' outcomes are heavily influenced by the conditions people operate inside every day, including a couple of things. One being leadership consistency, that's important. Communication patterns is important also. Workload design, psychological safety, decision-making, and trust from that perspective. So that is why the global shift now is taking place, is more well-being away from the programs. Now, the question becomes, how can WWASA support? And they've done so by developing a four-wheel framework. The framework recognizes the following dimensions: employee wellness, as you can see there, company wellness, customer wellness, and community wellness. The core idea is simple. Organizations don't operate in isolation. Employee well-being influences organizational performance. The organizational culture influences customer trust. Community conditions influence workforce resilience and long-term sustainability. The framework therefore encourages organizations to move beyond fragmented thinking and move towards a connected, system-based understanding of human sustainability. Importantly, this is not intended as a rigor as a rigid model. It's intended as a platform for ongoing research, collaboration, refinement, and multidisciplinary discussion. Because ultimately, sustainable organizations require an integrated system. And if you look at the screen now, one of the most powerful ideas in sustainable leadership and human development is that impact that scale really brings through people. In other words, how do you create generational multiplication? It starts off this way. We invest in developing just a small group of people, capable, healthy, valued driver leaders. They influence exponentially over time another group. Let's say they started with 10. The 10 then give a 10x, which is 100. And then those 100 give a 10x, which is 1,000. And then the 1,000 then give a 10x, which is 10,000. So if you as an individual are the starting of this as generational one, you then have the ability to have an impact to 10,000 people, which is quite important. And what is great about this, universities are equally positioned to become engineers of generational impact, not simply by transforming knowledge, but shaping human capability, resilience, ethics, adaptability, and future leadership. And perhaps this is a real opportunity here to move beyond isolated wellness initiatives, and begin building ecosystems that scale healthy functioning across generations. Because when people are equipped to help others thrive, impact becomes exponential. Thank you. And back to you, Steve.
Thanks, Dr. Henen. Let me take control and move on to the next one. Great. Our next speaker is Dr. Nomonde Mabuya, a respected public health and wellness leader with extensive experience in health systems, policy development, and organizational well-being. Her work focuses on building collaborative ecosystems that strengthen well-being, resilience, and sustainable development across institutions and communities. Today, Dr. Mabuya will help us explore the broader vision behind the network of excellence and the opportunity for national collaboration in workplace wellness research and innovation. Dr. Mabuya, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Thank you so much. I'm just going to get to the right screen. Sorry, these slides, for some reason, they look funny to me now. What we are ultimately trying to focus on today is really something much larger than an isolated wellness initiatives in the workplace. We are mainly speaking to the opportunity about building a connected workplace and national ecosystem around our human well-being, our organizational resilience, and sustainable institutional development. One of the major challenges across many sectors is that valuable research, institutional experience, and practical innovation often remain fragmented and disconnected. Different institutions are frequently trying to solve similar problems, but in isolation. Yet the challenges we face, be it mental health, workforce resilience, leadership fatigue, organizational sustainability, are all national challenges, and essentially most organizations are battling in getting their heads around the same issues, but we're just not working in a coordinated fashion to enhance what my previous speaker was mentioning, 10 by 10. I think that's a very important thing, key shift, making sure that you influence more than just the people around you. And increasingly, they require collaborative effort responses in all the work that we do. This is where the idea of a national wellness ecosystem becomes important. An ecosystem built around shared learning, collaborative research, benchmarking, data-informed insights, very important, and multidisciplinary cooperation. The vision is not simply to create another wellness program. The vision is to create a national platform capable of strengthening knowledge, informing policy, supporting research, and helping institutions better understand the human realities inside their system. Through collaboration between universities, researchers, practitioners, and employers, and public health stakeholders, we have the opportunity to begin building a stronger evidence base for organizational well-being and human sustainability in South Africa across the continent. Because ultimately, sustainable institutions require connected ecosystems, shared knowledge, and collaborative leadership. What we ultimately trying to build here it extends far beyond a single webinar or even a series of events. The long-term vision is the establishment of a genuine network of excellence, a collaborative system that connects academia, industry, wellness practitioners, employers, and policymakers around shared national wellness agenda. All at the center of this vision is the concept of National Wellness Observatory, a platform capable of generating meaningful insights into the state of workplace wellness across South Africa and eventually in the broader African continent. An important part of this initiative is creating opportunities for ongoing collaboration beyond today's conversation. Through the Network of Excellence and the upcoming USAF, which is the Universities of South Africa Summit, we hope to encourage multidisciplinary research clusters, collaborative working groups, shared learning, and benchmarking across institutions. And the goal is to bring together researchers, universities, practitioners, and organizational leaders who can work together to improve the society in India. Back to you, Stephen. Thank you so much, Steve.
Thanks, Dr. Mabuya. Appreciate that. Let me move on to this one. Right, great. Thank you. Our final speaker for today is Chris Late. He is the CEO of the Workplace Wellness Association of Southern Africa. Chris works at the intersection of workplace wellness, organizational sustainability, research collaboration, and strategic ecosystem development. His work focuses on building practical partnerships between academia, employers, healthcare, and leadership structures to strengthen human well-being and organizational resilience across Southern Africa. Today, Chris will conclude by outlining how institutions can participate in the network of excellence and contribute to this growing collaborative movement. Chris, over to you. Chris, do we have you online? It looks like we might have lost Chris. Farnes, can you step in, or do you want me to take these slides?
I'll step in for Chris as well, Steve. It looks like we have a number of technical glitches today. So let's talk about how universities can participate. I see Chris is saying he needs to be unmuted, but I do not see the function here on my side. I'm going to try and unmute. Okay, Chris, can you now unmute yourself?
There we go. Wonderful.
There we go. There we go. Thank you, Chris. Over to you. Sorry, I'm going to try and allow you to start your video as well in the meantime.
Okay.
you can, let's see if I can get that done. But over to you, Chris.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Um, Ladies and gentlemen, yes, today is about how universities can participate. All the SAPFI and USAF universities are automatically associated with WASA, and there's a big value add that the tertiary institutions get for free. So I would like to conclude today by focusing very specifically on how universities and academic stakeholders, um, there we go, stakeholders can participate in this initiative. What we are ultimately trying to build here is not simply another research initiative. That is part of it, but it's more. We are trying to build a collaborative ecosystem that can strengthen human sustainability across institutions, across workplaces, across society itself. The ecosystem only become real when people begin to participate together. That is where universities have an extraordinary opportunity to help shape the future of workplace well-being research, as well as organizational resilience and sustainable human performance across Africa. I don't have to mention how potentially little Africa south of the Sahara spends on workplace well-being relative to the rest of the world. It's something we need to change, and we can only do it together. So practical participation can begin immediately through climate studies, and again, I remind you on the QR code link, or we can also post the webinar, distribute that. It's a very simple climate study, but it's a start. And I think there's a lot of opportunities to improve on that. But already on that climate study, we've got around about 125 organizations that have participated, representing around 18,000 employees so far. So we're already starting to get a better idea of well-being in the workplace in South Africa. I'd also like to stimulate benchmarking, stimulate post-grad research collaboration. One of our service providers, Atomly's Monique Tauter, is doing a PhD on intellectual wellness and the effect of supplements on burnout, which is very relevant to the topic today. And we really encourage you to participate in her survey, which we'll distribute. So in the process, we can grow academic publications, we can grow pilot projects, we can grow working groups, we can grow this real valuable multidisciplinary approach. We also invite institutions to participate in the growing network of excellence and the ecosystem around it. The upcoming summit is obviously very important. And we really look forward to see researchers, practitioners, leadership structures, and universities building collaboratively around these themes. The real opportunity here is not only research, it is the opportunity to collectively shape the future. The design of healthier, more resilient, and more psychologically robust individuals in the institutions. Because meaningful change at societal scale rarely begins with one institution acting alone. It begins when ecosystems start forming around shared purpose, shared knowledge, and shared leadership. And perhaps that is exactly where this journey should begin. As we then conclude today, Perhaps the most important insight to leave with is that future sustainability of our institutions will increasingly depend on the sustainability of the humans inside them. The institutions we build tomorrow will shape not only economic outcomes, but also the psychological condition of societies we ultimately inherit. We've heard a lot about the challenges, the scary statistics that is out there, the ultimate realization that as technology and artificial intelligence increases, the challenges on the human psychological framework just increases dramatically. So the discussion today is not just about those concerns. It's the fact that they are becoming leadership concerns, governance challenges, educational challenges, and societal challenges. And perhaps this is where the real opportunity now emerge. Not simply to improve our workplace wellness and well-being, but to begin building this collaborative ecosystem that we are all talking about and asking for, to strengthen our human resilience in the organizations. What WASA is ultimately trying to build is not merely an event platform or a professional association. It aims to be an ecosystem for research, for collaboration, for benchmarking, for shared learning, for institutional transformation. Because none of these challenges will be solved in isolation or by acting alone. Sustainable progress will increasingly depend on connected leadership, multidisciplinary collaboration, and shared knowledge ecosystems. The future will not be shaped only by the technologies we built, but by whether the humans inside our institutions remain capable of sustaining them. Let us build that future together, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, and back to you, Steve.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, perfect. We now move into a short panel discussion and a Q&A session. The uncomfortable question begins to emerge, and maybe that's how we can start the panel discussion. How well do our institutions actually understand the lived experience of the people inside them? With that in mind, I would like to invite the panel participants to begin reflecting on some of these questions together. Could you unmute yourselves and put your cameras on? Alan, as the chairman of WASA, will chair the panel and talk us through the topics. I will watch the chat and the Q&A, and if any questions pop up, I'll put them to the panel. Alan, are you able to talk to us now?
I am able to connect right now. Thank you very much. Thanks for Farners standing in for me.
Yeah, sorry about the earlier technical glitch, but these things happen.
No problem.
And right, Alan, do you want to kick off with your thoughts?
Thank you very much. I think just a summary of the presentations that we've seen today really hones in on collaboration. Collaboration amongst our tertiary institutions to not only deliver academic results, but to ensure that they take a lead in the whole notion of well-being. And I'm very, very impressed with what the speakers all had the same message in that regard. I think that WASA is well placed to coordinate the tertiary environment, and our CEO, Chris, I will speak to him regarding getting in touch and getting principals from each institution to set up a forum in this regard. And I think the higher health environment is already a structure that we can engage with. So if there's companies that really want to make a contribution in this regard, to please get in touch with either Chris or Farnes, drop an email so that we can get the ball rolling and put some action behind the words. I'm going to open the floor to some questions, Steve, and then get the experts to respond. Please just drop your chat in the chat box as well, and we would be happy to respond in this regard.
Okay, we have a very shy group of attendees so far. I often find this is the case for the first few minutes after a session has started. So can I ask Dr. Wolfart, you were quite a passionate speaker earlier about the topic. Could you talk about your reflections from a university perspective? And then in the meantime, please, if you have any views, comments, or thoughts, or if you'd like to join the conversation live, simply unmute yourself and undo your camera, and then you can join the discussion. Thanks.
So I am not going to, I can't speak on behalf of other universities, etc., but I can. What I do think is important is to differentiate between two things. One is psychosocial support, and the other one is mental health care. So often institutions are more geared towards providing psychosocial support. In other words, students who have problems adapting to the university environment, students who've got financial distress, students who are just lonely. But the reality is we just don't have the people in the country to provide the mental health care, which means we're talking about talk therapy or pharmacotherapy. In other words, either giving somebody medication because they are depressed, or giving them a professional or semi-professional ear that they can listen to. I'm sure you've all seen this. There's big court cases starting, or that's pending against the social media giants because of people turning to AI for help and not necessarily getting the help they need. And I think it's what we must understand is if there are no humans available, you can't really blame people for turning to a digital world for help. But that digital world could include anybody or anything with not necessarily the right competencies to support somebody. So from that perspective, I think something the country really has to face up to is the need for developing lay counsellors within an academic environment, for example. We historically did this very effectively with the AIDS epidemic. Right at the beginning, when AIDS was a major problem, treatment was difficult to access. What is now Higher Health started, we worked with them to start a program called First Things First, and that was to just get HIV testing and counseling onto academic campuses, and it eventually grew into something that is now completely sustained by higher education. We've got to go back to that same point, right? Mm-hmm. The state of mental health in the world is the worst it's ever been. And start saying, we know there is evidence-based, relatively simple ways that you can train up people to provide really good basic mental health support. And you need that type of network out there, given the prevalence rates that I was quoting you. And then you've got to obviously build the referral systems to that progressively smaller and smaller group of people who are the professionals who can help. And again, just to contextualize it, we probably, if we're lucky, have 800 psychiatrists left in the country. So that's sort of my comment. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, thanks, Christoph. Sorry to interrupt you, but I know Alan has got a hard stop at 3 o'clock, which is now just past us. Alan, do you want to say cheers to everybody and be on your bike?
Yes, Steve, I have to join a similar forum to our workplace forum. And I want to thank all the participants, all the presenters, and we really look forward to engaging very closely with our participants and our speakers to ensure that we put meat, so to speak, to the subject, and it doesn't become a sort of a hollow promise or just a discussion point. Really, from my heart, thanks to all the speakers and to those that participated. Thank you very much, Steve.
Thanks, Alan. Cheers.
Cheers.
Okay, Chris, you had a question or a point to make?
Yes, yeah, and fascinated by some of the work that Gustav's organization is doing, and yeah, we must bring some of that over. Maybe there's opportunity to elaborate on that, Dr. Wolfhard. But my question is actually, Dr. Hene, if you would share some of your insights. Your book was really something that stood out. The key shift and the 6 keys of unlocking your potential, and a lot of what we talked about today is those 6 keys. I mean, I'm talking about performance under pressure, identity and mindset, transformation through small pivots, practical applications, to just name a few. I specifically like that part where you said, well, what will Michael Jackson do? That, and maybe just in this topic of kind of being a bit scared about the future and how it's affecting our youth, our students, our organizations. There's some valuable input in terms of self-help. If you would maybe use a minute or two to share some of that wisdom with us, please.
Thank you very much, Chris. I think I always say there's a great author in the 1920s, but I was not alive at that time. He wrote, "Ships are safe in the harbor," but that's not what ships were built for. So in other words, the harbor is a safe, predictable environment. And as we all know that the current environment is very volatile. There's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of complexity, and there's a lot of ambiguity. So all of us, including university, everybody, have to work in accordance to that. And by understanding that you've got to do certain things to unlock your potential or reach the heights that you have. And there's 6 things that a person has got to do so. 1, people have to have a learner mindset. In other words, there must be a learn it all, not a know it all. That's critical. And in this kind of environment, people are continuously learning. People are looking to know, what else can I learn? And who can I learn from? So that's quite important. Then number 2 is that key 2 is about finding opportunities within obstacles. As we know, with any research, there will be findings that may not go against to the terms that you want. But those findings add to a body of work. So, and that may redirect you in a different direction until you find the ultimate solution. Then key 3 is talking about learning from failure. All of us, in some form or shape, have failed. But we mustn't make failure as a data point or make it about us saying it's my identity to fail. No, everybody fails. It's just that how do you respond to failure? Number 4 is what we're doing today. It's about love and relationships. How do you create an ecosystem where people work together in the most impressive way? And what we find in that environment is 2 things. The greatest people and who've become successful in that space, they've got 2 things. They've mastered themselves. You've got to master yourself. And number 2, you've got to have a close ally in terms of that. But what I then like is that you need that close ally of yours to be a truth teller. For example, Earlier in the week, we engaged with Gustav. Gustav said, listen, remember this and this and this, I see it in a different way. And that, accepting that, actually takes the discussions further and enriches the discussions. Then number 5, key 5, talks about health and wellness. The health and wellness is foundational. And how do you scale with the poor health? You can't scale with the poor health. You can't adapt because you have ailments from that perspective. So that is quite key. Your body is your engine. And I talk about research there that I conducted over 4 years in financial services in the country with over 40,000 staff in the financial sectors. And it showed that plus minus 75% of the staff were physically inactive. 80% had a poor fruit and vegetable intake. 60% were overweight. Now, if you look at it, financial services is the heartbeat of the country. If the heartbeat of the country is not well, it doesn't bode well for all matters. And then the last one, which I then talk about, is exponential growth. Exponential growth, I talk about a 10x factor, not a 10% increment, a 10x factor. Why that is important? It's a leap from who you are and a leap from where you are to who you can become. So you've got to take that leap. But you can never take the leap and run fast if your health is not good. And the most important thing is that if you are fighting, if you're looking at 10% improvements, you are actually competing with inflation. You'll never be successful by competing in inflation because you'll never beat your competitors, you'll never be the next level. So then you talk about the 10x factor. How do you have the 10x factor? But importantly, all these, they're all integrated with the foundational of having a good health and wellness.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to you helping WASA with its 10x process.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Dr. Nene. Dr. Maboyek, I've got a question for you from Shanley Seister. Maybe you'll give us a perspective on this, or any panel member. The question is, or the statement is, first of all, how do you teach a skill like coping, managing change? For me, it is something that needs to be taught from a young age in primary school. Starting university at the university level might be too late. Schools need to introduce this into their life skills programs and practice role play with kids. So the question is, when will this research be translated into a skills building course or content to implement in education?
Thank you so much, Steve. Very good question and extremely complex. We don't necessarily have an answer today, but we can try and give a perspective on what could probably help. I think maybe firstly by mentioning the fact that I agree that we need to start integrating these kind of things very early on in life. And why that is becoming important is exactly what was mentioned earlier in one of the presentations. We are now facing a society that is constantly living in digital overload, information saturation. People are always connected. Even at home, the children are being given digital gadgets. So at a very early age, children can lose their social skills because they are not necessarily playing outside or developing their social skills. And when they get to school, it's a similar kind of situation where their leadership is overworked, there is exhaustion. So when do we actually take time to learn how to incorporate the skills that we are talking about? So it's something that's got to be done constantly in our own homes, in our own communities, even at the workplace, to make sure that firstly we self-regulate ourselves. And I mean, self-care, what Dr. Nene mentioned, talks mostly also around self-care. We must regulate ourselves as human beings to make sure that we can start integrating these particular skills throughout and within our ecosystems. The culture, the organization must allow that sort of integration of new skill sets in the workplace, but also I think what we do at home and what we do within our communities, it's still part of extending the culture of or the skill sets that we want to retain and to make sure that we create sustainable societies. The one point we didn't touch on, Chris, I see your hand is up. is that with all what is happening within our ecosystem, especially with digital overload, that affects mostly our sleep health. People don't sleep anymore, or they don't have a quality sleep. And that tends to be shown in the workplace through poor productivity. People are irritable, people are not friendly, people don't participate meaningfully, and that sort of thing. And I think it's just something, with the skills, bringing this thing into the skill set and making sure that we develop better leaders. We just start monitoring our sleep pattern, because that's really emerging as a new key pandemic for the future. And it's just something we have not necessarily touched on today, but I just think it's just one of those things we shouldn't overlook, because the more we don't sleep, the more we impact on our chronic disease programs, depression, anxiety, and all that sort of thing. Thank you.
Steve, I think you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Yes. Go for it.
Sorry, Dr. Namande. Sorry, I wanted to grab you while you're in the limelight. Dr. Namande is our vice chair, a leader in our organization, and is really promoting us to have to collaborate with, and we are collaborating with Amazon Web Services and a number of providers, with the aim of creating a national database. And I think many of the things that you said, problems, we are on the periphery of understanding it, but we still don't really have hard data. Maybe Dr. Mane, if you would be so kind to just share a little bit about with regards to your vision on that. I think it's quite important for this audience. Sorry, you're on mute, Namane.
Sorry about that. Sorry. It always happens to the best of us. Sorry about that. I think the whole issue around bringing Amazon Web Services on board is to really start making sure that we can have data, evidence-based kind of services that we can sort of relate to and support, and that can also influence our decision-making processes. I think one of the biggest frustrations that most employers find is that they spend money on these wellness programs. Service provider after service provider comes, but the return on investment always remains an issue. So if we can then really show the evidence in terms of what we're doing, and one of the key messages I just want to also mention is, we sometimes don't necessarily think about who cares for carers. Now, Dr. Nene shared some of the work that he did in the financial services. I do mostly work also in the healthcare services. The same issues that in the financial care services are having, we also have them in the healthcare space. What's worse is that in the hospital environment, there's no gyms. The canteens serve wrong food, and people are not physically fit. The only fitness they do is when they lift patients and that sort of thing. But in reality, we don't measure what we do. So bringing a data-enabled environment will help us to start having solid evidence that we can monetize and also show real data in terms of how that can be turned into value or help us to create more sustainable workplace programs that are easy to sell or also to get more buy-in, because data always speaks for itself. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you so much. Steve, is there another question? Because I'd actually like to just stimulate a bit of a conversation. Can I go?
Yes, please do. Go ahead. Yeah.
Dr. Wolfert, we spent some time, I think it's almost a year ago, and personally being fascinated with primary care, and I think also the participant that asked the question to Dr. Namande was, can we not start earlier at schools, for example? And I'd just like you to share a bit of your thoughts around using counselors and maybe even lay counselors in a preventative scenario, because I think a lot of the things we talked about today, if early detection, as with any kind of disease, if early detection can be promoted in the workplace, we can attend to serious problems quicker. So just maybe a quick minute or two on that, if you don't mind, Gustav.
So according to one of the great South African psychiatrists, the late Professor Dan Stein from UCT, who had a phenomenal body of work, I think over 2,000 publications. The biggest impact on your future mental health is the first 1,000 days of your life. So when you talk about early interventions, you really are talking about interventions pre-birth and immediately after birth. So we know that postpartum depression is very high. And it brings me back to this thing about the human resources for health. I don't think fully appreciate how, not just the mental health, but across the board, what the shortage of healthcare professionals are. As I mentioned at the end of the previous thing, I think we've got 800 psychiatrists left in the country. I think the psychologists are around 6,000. We've got about 6,000 psychiatric nurses left. We're not replacing them at the rate that they are retiring. We introduced a cadre of mid-level workers who do phenomenal work, registered counsellors. But they were for a long time, for example, not on the government payroll establishment. They are now, which meant the universities stopped producing them. So if you really want to get services out there, you've got to think outside of the box. Producing a psychologist takes a good 10 years. Producing a psychiatrist takes 12, 14 years because they do have to do medicine, etc. Now, what we've done a lot of research on, and we did a really big implementation project in Mozambique, was on a group called interpersonal counselors. So these are lay counselors that are trained on a short form version of interpersonal therapy, which is a 12-session therapy model used by psychologists. And that same people who developed that model developed the interpersonal counselor, which is the lay counselors. Now, Mozambique has embraced it because their numbers were horrendous in terms of specialist professionals. So I think they're sitting with already 4,000 of these interpersonal counselors deployed within their healthcare system. South Africa is not yet made that switch. 33 other countries have, including first world countries. Because even in first world countries, the mental health burden has completely overwhelmed the capacity of the system to provide it. For me, it's a no-brainer, right? It's evidence-based. It's relatively easy to train people up on this. There's lots of technology that supports them in the process, and you've got to just plug them into a referral system. Because that's where you've got to do is you've got to make sure that every pregnant mother is supported. You must make sure that there is support that reaches out into households and at community level. At the moment, one of my big struggles is trying to just get fluoxetine, which is Prozac's generic name, rescheduled in the country, that it's not scheduled as a habit-forming drug, because it's not, right? None of the antidepressants are habit-forming, but we still have them under scheduling from 1972. And what that means in practice is nurses, who are the bulk of our primary care services, cannot prescribe them. Right? And it's a huge process to get a drug rescheduled. But just that is, for me, is the stuff that needs to happen, is we need to make treatment available to it where people are. And we can do it with stroke of the pen type of changes just to regulations. Just being open to accepting that we can't be protective about, it's a threat to my income if I allowed lay counsellors to provide care, because our professionals also, we've got such a shortage that it'll never be a threat to their income. I'll stop there. Thanks. You know me, I can bang on about this the whole time, but I do think we're facing a national crisis and we need to respond to it. And we've got to think differently. You can't solve problems with the same type of thinking that got you into the problem.
Cool.
Well, just before we give Sanusha the opportunity, Steve, I just want to reiterate that what Dr. Wolfhard now said here is so important, and it really, in my mind, starts with getting better data, and it starts with broadening the participation in climate studies, etc. So please, members, have a look at that. That's the work we do for you. Thank you, Steve.
That's great. Thanks, Chris. Sanusha, you've got your hand up. Would you like to comment and unmute and show us your face on camera, please?
Yeah, I can unmute. It's just that I'm driving at the moment, so if okay if I don't show the camera.
No, that's fine. No problem. Thanks.
I just wanted to check, from a statutory perspective, and I appreciate that the presentation and it's very well received. We've had a recent incident where the Health Professions Council started challenging scopes of work undertaken by employee health and wellness practitioners who are not statutory registered as either clinical psychologist, counseling psychologist under the Health Professions Council, or under the Social Work Council as a social worker. So I would really appreciate if we could have the networks of those training facilities or courses that provide an additional support to our counselors, because as all of us as academics would probably aware how HW has evolved in all different fields of the world. And particularly, there's no one qualification that covers the whole spectrum of areas that fall under employee health and wellness. And we've had a case where the council had investigated and alleged that individuals are practicing out of their scope. So whilst we presented to them the scenario to say there is such a need for all of us collaboratively to work on dealing with issues from a multidimensional perspective. So, it's just something that I agree with the gentleman who spoke now, to say that all of us need to work in collaboration to reduce the burden of and the impact of mental health in our societies and our workplace. But I think it also starts with us lobbying to review prescription medication legislation, statutory acts that were in place well before mental health has become such an issue, burnout, harassment, and bullying. When those legislations and statutory prescripts were drafted, those phenomena were not in place. So I think we have a lot of work to do further research, and that research will be evidence-based research that will guide. So, I'll be keen to collaborate with anybody who's keen also to look at exploring networks and research in these fields to strengthen the support that's needed. I think you guys have my details, and I'd love to touch base. And also, if we could have the contact details of those who are providing a variety of different training modalities that as a province of KZN we can collaborate with. I'm from the government sector, And I appreciate the work that the association is doing. Thank you.
Thanks, Anusha. Great comments and super important. We've got to have laws that are in the current context, not the past context. Gustav, did you want to make a comment on that, or can we move to, I have a person here who is on e-learning at isacarstens.coza. Can you unmute and ask your question?
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thanks.
Okay, good. So I was asked to sit into today. We are higher education as well. But I'm talking on a personal basis, and I would like to iterate that this is come from a personal point of view. So before this, I was 10 years in education, in primary schools and special schools and all that. So I have an honors degree in educational psychology as well. And what I've noticed, and that's why I asked that question where I said, why are we targeting university up, higher education up, and not primary school? And the reason for this is burnout is already happening. I saw it happening from a lower level in education. Really, things are too much. Kids, and I think one of the speakers also spoke about the technology. You know, when I made the other day, I made a joke and I said, you know, when I was younger, I could play around, I could look dirty, my hair could be standing up like sky high, and only the people around me would know about it. These days, social media, everybody knows, embarrassment is on a new level. Today, we had a colleague actually come up to me and say, you know what, I'm so anxious. What if people sees my social media? What if my future family, my father-in-law, my mother-in-law don't like my social media? And I thought to myself, what a silly type of anxiety to have. And then I realized she's still young, in the young 20s. And I realized, wow, this is the type of anxiety that is currently developing in these younger kids or students, younger people coming up. And for me, my age, that is not something that would have triggered my anxiety. And it just made me realize after listening to you guys as well, how young it starts. And and so I just wanted to say that, and that's why I'm saying with the research that you guys are doing, I would really like to, and I mentioned it in the comments, I'm just going to say it again, is that when I'm in Western Cape, so I was part of the Western Cape Education Department, and they have an amazing initiative that they're doing called Transform to Perform. And I'm not sure if you guys are aware of it at, how to say, WWASA, but they have a T2P, Transform to Perform. They have these 4 pillars. And the pillars are called change mindset, where they focus on the well-being of teachers and the change mindset and skills training in order for those teachers to be able to teach in the world ever-changing. And then the second one is called growth mindset, which are focusing on students. And I think about talk about it, that I can mentality that you want to incorporate, indoctrinate into the students. And then the other 2 pillars was value-driven education. So with everything we do, we put values into it. And I think that helps build character, helps build and it would help with mental health in future years. And then the last one was they focused on targeting leaders and management to start changing the mentality about how to see these things in wellness within. So amazing research could be, or data could be gathered from that. And I think that is something that you guys have to go and look into and ask WCD if you could maybe go, because all the schools does it. And it's piloted, it is tried. So maybe from that, we could maybe build something as well. So that's just my comment.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I've personally made a note, and maybe also that this actually segues very well into our next month's webinar. So maybe I can contact them for the input on that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, great. Right, we are at 3:30. I'd like to close off now. Thank you very much for the comments and questions and for the participation of the panel. We have now reached the end of the webinar. Please be so kind as to scan the QR code for the webinar feedback. Every participant that sends us feedback will be sent a complimentary WASA book. So we really would like your feedback. And we hope you've enjoyed today, and we look forward to seeing you in the month of June. Thanks, and good afternoon.
Thank you, Steve.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Goodbye.